it's a lot of buses up and down. Lots of events in Dublin with the likes of Foreign Affairs and Irish Aid, and as well as that, lots of trips over to, we've had trips to Berlin, to New York, to Geneva, and it's been a really good year. But I suppose our main prerogative is to work on a number of different facets, such as the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and as well as that, obviously working on the likes of climate change, quality education, reducing inequalities. And it's, as the slide says here, our main role is just to be an active agent in communicating the United Nations to young people in Ireland, and to make sure that young people's voices are adequately represented. It's anyone on the chat, or anyone who's had any experience in working on behalf of young people or advocating for young people's rights knows that there are quite a lot of challenges, and it's really important that young people are at the fore of these issues and at the discussion table. So that's what we try and do best. But I might let Valerie to jump onto the next slide there.
Yeah, so just to say a little bit about the program, like Jack said, it's really that branch between representing the voices of young people and also making sure that you're communicating the institution of the United Nations as such. And because sometimes the United Nations can feel like an institution that is so far away from young people can feel very disconnected, they can feel like it's not for them. So it's also a good way to remember not just that a UN Youth Delegate brings the voice of young people to the institution, but we're also bringing the institution to the young people, making it so accessible, understanding what the role is. So in that sense, you're probably wondering, actually, where does it come from, the UN Youth Delegate program? So it's well embedded actually within the UN institution. So member states formally kind of committed to a unified approach on youth that they call the World, so if you look it up, it's actually called the World Program of Action for Youth. It was done actually in 1995. And so part of that resolution, and I've nicely put the resolution for nerds out there, like myself, that like this kind of stuff. So on the resolution 5081 paragraphs, like 107, that's exactly where the paragraph talks about UN Youth Delegates. So the World Program Action for Youth actually has 10. It has 10 parts, and one element of it, or one article of it, is about youth participation, and that's really where the UN Youth Delegate program is embedded. Again, about participating the voices of young people within the institution, but also bringing the institution to young people.
Cool. So moving on to the next slide now. Yeah, so we'll talk specifically about the Irish program. As I said, it's in a lot more different countries, but just for this presentation, we're going to focus on our side of things. So as the slide says, it is a collaboration between the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, between Irish Aid, and of course the National Youth Council of Ireland. So there's a lot of different bodies involved, and that's to make sure that we can do the best job that we can do. It means that we can adequately represent young people, and that we kind of have all bases covered, that we can really work with the experts, whether it's the Human Rights Council in Geneva, whether it's the General Assembly over in New York, or whether it's issues here at home, or working on the Sustainable Development Goals like we have been for this year. But I think it's probably best to get it from the people themselves. So I'd like to introduce Aoife O'Rourke. Aoife O'Rourke has been doing absolutely fantastic work for us, making sure we're on the straight and narrow, making sure that we're doing the best job that we can do. So Aoife, if you wouldn't mind just saying a quick hello and kind of giving an overview from DFA's perspective.
Great, yeah, thanks Jack. Can you hear me okay, yeah?
Can.
Great. Hi everybody, it's a real pleasure to be here and speak with you today. I recognize already some of the faces and the names, so we may have run into each other at various events or so on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aoife O'Rourke and I work in UN policy in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. I coordinate the programme from our side. Valerie and Jack are already doing a great job of explaining what's going on and how everything works, so I won't speak for very long, but totally happy to take questions and engage in discussion when we get to that stage. So the UN Youth Delegate program launched in 2015, and since then we've had 5 incredible sets of young people representing Ireland at all kinds of events. Some of them have gone on to work in our department. Some of them indeed are already diplomats. Some are in the UN itself, in the Secretariat, some even kind of local politics. So, I mean, you know, some of that is to do with the experiences on the program. Most of it is to do with how extraordinary these young activists are when they come to us. The program varies from year to year, and it can really depend on the interests and the enthusiasm of each individual set of delegates, you know, kind of where they want to put their eye, you know, and we can be led by that in the department. So it's quite flexible. It has grown in each iteration in terms of the activities, in terms of what the youth delegates have been engaged in. Every year a set piece has been that the youth delegates, of course, travel to New York for High Level Week, the opening of the UN General Assembly, and they stay on for some of the committee season, including to address Third Committee. I imagine a lot of people here are maybe familiar with the UN, but the Third Committee is the committee that deals with social, humanitarian and human rights affairs. Some of the other activities that youth delegates have undertaken over the years, have a little list, include speaking at Ireland's voluntary national review of the SDGs. This was huge. We were, you know, really quite unusual in that as a state in our VNR, and it made a massive splash. It was fantastic and important. Our youth delegates were really involved in Ireland's chairing of the Commission on the Status of Women. 2 sets ago, the youth delegates produced a spotlight report on the attitudes of Irish young people towards the SDGs. The SDGs obviously are a huge part of what the youth delegates do in terms of outreach and raising awareness. They've also, all iterations, spoken at and hosted multiple side events. Jack's already mentioned that, you know, some of their travels, and this year saw the first time, or this cycle saw the first time that the youth delegates travelled to the UN in Geneva, which was really important. Also, we're seeing increased engagement across the EU. So Valerie and Jack came to speak to the working group on United Nations issues with other youth delegates from all over Europe, and that was a really important event. I won't go into detail about the absolute myriad of incredible things they've achieved this year, and I'll leave that to them. You know, from the department's perspective, the program is really, really valuable. All of you are probably aware that although youth voices have always had value, they're now being incorporated more and more into the mainstream. Jack and Valerie have had the opportunity to input into a number of areas of the department's work, including very recently Ireland's statement to the UN Security Council on youth, peace and security. They also contributed with other EU youth delegates to the European statement. I really love to tell you that the increased inclusion of young people's voices in policy development and international rhetoric is because we as diplomats or politicians or so on have copped on to how valuable all your voices are. And to an extent that's true. To a much greater extent it's because of the work that activists like all of you and like youth delegates do and have pushed into that space, whether it's in climate or UN issues in general. And that's a real moment of opportunity that we've seen Jack and Valerie already capitalize on and will continue to do for the next number of years, I hope. And it's really important for you in your activism, you know, on UN issues and on anything else to remember that the importance of the inclusion of youth voices isn't for inclusion's sake. It's because your voices lead to better policies, longer lasting, and just with perspectives that really we don't have already in political or civil service circles. I'd just like to finish off to saying a very quick word of thanks to Valerie Duffy, who really makes the program happen there in NYCI, and of course to Valerie and Jack. They've genuinely been extraordinary in their role. They're going to be a tough act to follow, but I'm excited to see who comes next, and whoever does come next will have really marvelous mentorship in the shape of Valerie and Jack. And I'm really looking forward to listening to what they have to say now. So thanks for the opportunity to speak, Valerie. Thanks, Jack.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aoife. And like for us, I know that having you there to help us coordinate and like go around whenever things were a little crazy, where we didn't really know what the hell we were doing. It was so great to have you there, and you were always there to help us. So thank you so much for that as well. And just before we start even reviewing about the year as such, I thought it would be important to mention, to basically kind of like connect what Aoife had said about the role of the Sustainable Development Goal as a framework to working really well, because the Sustainable Development Goal actually came from the United Nations, and it is a great framework because it kind of combines all of the different issues that we're facing in the world. It's also sort of like a nicer roadmap to making sure that we get to that better world. So in that sense as well, Jack and I, when we started, we also looked at the Sustainable Development Goal, and we're like, there's only two of us. We can't do everything. We can speak about everything, but what are these issues that we think young people in Ireland are thinking that they're the biggest issues that young people are talking about, and how can we frame that in a way where wherever we are interacting with both the institution, the department, nationally with young people, that we can actually frame it. So I think if you followed our journey a little bit, you'll probably have picked up that Sustainable Development Goal 13 was like one of our biggest talk, and we think that we really focused on the social justice aspect of it because we wanted to be able to touch upon everything else. But youth unemployment was also something that was in our mind, so we talked a lot as well about decent work. So Goal 8 was also there to carry us along, and mental health was something that we're very much aware, and we know that it's something that young people in Ireland were talking a lot about and wanted more work to be done on. So you will see it reflected even in our speech at third committee and stuff. So yeah, you do have to give yourself some sort of frame when you're starting to make sure that you're just not everywhere, but that you have a frame of mind of like, this is not what I'm just thinking, but this is really the voices of young people of Ireland, because that's where you get that legitimacy then to work on those topics. Yeah, so I just wanted to include that in there. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide, please.
Cool. So we'll start. We'll start the year in review. So I mean, you can see the photographs there. It's we've been fortunate enough to be in a lot of different hallowed halls and venues and meeting rooms and negotiation tables throughout the year. It's a very hands-on experience, especially I think this year more so than others. Ireland is running for the UN Security Council this year, which is like one of probably the core element of the entire United Nations. So with that, we got fantastic opportunities to really engage with high-level leaders in terms of discussing human rights in Geneva, in terms of discussing representation in New York, and in terms of, you can even see there, we got to work on some fantastic issues with some even more remarkable people. We got to meet with various heads of states, we got to meet with ambassadors, we got to meet with politicians, and it was a really good kick-off to the year. We might jump onto the next slide there and start digging into the year as a whole. So our very first event was, I think we only found out maybe a couple of days before that we were actually youth delegates, and next thing we knew, we were on a flight over to Switzerland for the Human Rights Council in Geneva. So the Human Rights Council, as the name suggests, deals with everything regarding human rights and the United Nations. So we were very fortunate enough to be warmly welcomed by the Geneva team, with the ambassador you can see, and we started working on two main elements. It was the improvement of civil society space, so allowing civil society to have a better say and a more adequate representation at negotiation tables. And as well as that, we got a really good and really real insight into human rights defenders. There were meetings happening, people coming from all over the world, human rights defenders, and we got to speak with them firsthand about the issues that they faced and the challenges that they've come across by being human rights defenders. And I think it showed for me personally how lucky we are in Ireland to have so much civil liberty and to have so much, to have a far greater level of equality in comparison to a lot more countries. So we jumped in at the deep end, I think, in my own opinion, but it was certainly, it opened our eyes, I think, to the actual inner workings of the United Nations and set a really good precedent for every event after that. But yeah, that was our first gig in Geneva.
Yeah, I mean, like, come to think of it now, I don't know if you agree with me, Jack, but like looking back, I actually thought Geneva, when we went to Geneva, I was like, oh my God, this is so big, and then there's so much
Yeah.
going on. And then you meet New York, and then it makes Geneva
Yeah,
looks
New
more
York just hit you
sane.
in the face.
So I have to say, it was actually such a great idea to start with an institution of the UN that that works in slightly different pace than New York. And like Jack said, it was amazing organizing a side event straight back, like bat on, organizing a side event with civil society, with different missions at the UN, and the team were amazing, full of confidence that you can do it. And I think that was also great. We really got the space to say to give our input, and the feedbacks as well that came back were great, and people really advancing that. So that was an experience in itself as a first. Yeah. Can you go to the second? I mean, so after Geneva, our next big event was the High Level Political Forum. So the High Level Political Forum takes place every year in July, if I'm not mistaken, June, July, and it's about actually the review of the Sustainable Development Goal. It's about the progress that each country is doing in terms of the Sustainable Development Goal. As I said, in comparison to Geneva, the institution in New York, people are just everywhere. It's like go, 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 go every second. So I think going to the High Level Political Forum, what that helped was it helped us establish some sort of understanding of how the actual institution worked, the workings of the institution. You will think, and by that I'm not just talking about how they're dealing with this, the topic. Barely just knowing which room that you need to go in, which room that you need to actually sit in is really important, because so much is happening at the same time. So strategically meeting the right people, that you can start a conversation, that you can be invited to a side event that is happening where you can also give your input. So like Aoife said, the program really depends on it depends heavily as well on you and your willingness to use the platform. So there's so much the department can do to help you have that platform, getting you to the place. But then the remainder of the work is really like what you want to do out of it. So if you want to make sure that your voice is heard in this area, if you think this topic is really important, and in that room there's not the perspective of young people, not just sit at the back and not say anything, do press that microphone and say something that will actually push forward the conversation. And from my experience of the High Level Political Forum was that it was always great. It was always well received when a young person did bring a perspective. It kind of also brought the conversation in a different place. So you have to remember that we're bringing a different lens, a lens that nobody else is going to have, and it's important. So if we don't bring it in the room, no one else is going to bring it. And that's why it's important to actually speak out and say this thing. So yeah. But the High Level Political Forum is a little bit, it's a good way to start, but there's too much happening at the same time, so bear that in mind.
Yeah, that was exactly it, Valerie. It's for me, it was a crash course in logistical organization. We had to be in 10 places at once, so we really had to learn to kind of work efficiently and work effectively. We were a lot better doing that in the General Assembly, I feel, than the High Level Political Forum. Yeah. But just to kind of resonate what Valerie was saying, we got first-hand experience to be in negotiation rooms with some of the world leaders. I mean, with some ministers on an Irish behalf anyways, and some foreign ministry as well. And we got to really see actually how negotiations happen within the United Nations. The HLPF, the High Level Political Forum, was busy, but it's a lot more relaxed in the General Assembly. And it's very good. You have voluntary national reviews, which is just countries reviewing their progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we really got to understand how the system as a whole works and how it all works together. But definitely the most difficult part, as Valerie mentioned, was actually just getting the right room half the time. New York is surprisingly big, and the United Nations building is even bigger than you anticipated to be. So definitely getting around there is an eye opener. So we'll move on to this. Sorry, go on, Valerie.
Just one more thing before to make that difference between the high-level political forum and the General Assembly. Actually, during the high-level political forum, there's actually a greater number of civil society present, because it's about the review of Sustainable Development Goal. And the reason why I'm saying this is because you actually get to meet a lot of activists. You get to meet people that are actually working on the different issues in different countries. And for me, anyway, that was very inspiring, creating those connections, knowing exactly what's happening on the ground in each of the countries was really, really important. The General Assembly is slightly different because there's less presence of civil society, but like the HLPF, that's one of the benefits that I saw of the HLPF, is like the presence of civil society and their voices and coming together to make sure that you're pushing a certain agenda. Yeah, we can move on to the next one.
Yeah, so at the end of August, start of September, we had our pre-UN General Assembly Advocacy Meeting weekend in Berlin, in Germany. And as you can see by all these happy faces here, these were our batch of European Union Youth Delegates to the United Nations. So coming from a load of different countries all across the EU who would be attending the General Assembly. And again, this was like a preparatory crash course into how the General Assembly will work, and how we as youth delegates can best work together and work towards common goals and issues. It was a great opportunity for us, I think, maybe more than anything else, to actually get to know the youth delegates in a very relaxed environment. We had seen from the high-level political forum how crazy New York was going to be, so it was nice to kind of have one safe space where we could all just really get to know each other, get to understand what our wants and interests are and what motivated us to be youth delegates, but as well as that, to try and see what our main interests are in terms of advocacy and representing young people. So we got a crash course into the UN as a whole, into the General Assembly, and beyond that, it was a really good opportunity, and I can't stress that enough, to actually work with other youth delegates and get to know them in a very relaxed environment.
Yeah, like definitely. I think Berlin, the training in Berlin was for me the creation of a family, a support system that helps you navigate the UN system. And like it's really important, because when we're talking about this, the UN, we're talking about the global community. And global community also, it's great because it means that you're coming with different perspectives, but it also brings the different challenges of actually how do we move past something when we don't agree or we don't see eye to eye. So it was really great to have this crazy bunch to always rely on, because they became family, basically. They became your support system in New York. When you were in a room and you were frustrated, you knew who you can talk to, both strategically as well. If we wanted to move something as young people, rather than like representative of countries and stuff, we came together and strategically thought about how is it possible for us to get this out there on the table, because like 10 voices is always better than one voice. So if we're all asking for the same thing, at one point somebody's going to turn around and be like, they must be onto something if they're all asking for it. So having that group and coming together, like Jack said, it was a lot of fun, because it's not all work. It was a lot of fun meeting and finding out crazy stuff about each other, but also finding out the passion. And so that passion and knowing that the other person is in the same boat with you because they want this change can kind of also remind you in the moment of frustration that they may say something and you don't agree, but you remember that at the end of the day, you guys are all looking for the same thing, and you can take a step back and actually work together better. So Diplomacy 101 started really in Berlin. And like, you know, if you're going to try to convince like people, like actual proper diplomats, or self as well, we had to convince each other how that we can work together as well. So Berlin was great in that sense. Yeah. Oof. The mother load, the UN General Assembly. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know where to begin. So this was 3 weeks in New York of lots happening at the same time, but also of a great experience. I think we probably have split it into different section of what actually happened within the 3 weeks. So the General Assembly for us started with the Youth Climate Summit, which was the first ever Youth Climate Summit to ever happen in New York. So being in that building with so many other young people from all across the world talking about the same subject, really challenging our world leader, also telling them that they're not on this, they're not doing this on their own, that we're willing to take part in the solution, was amazing. The exchange, for me, what I would always remember from the Youth Climate Summits was the exchange that we had in the different room with young people, and listening to what one another were doing, and how can we actually do this better, what the realities as well of other people's life, because sometimes we're advocating for something, but it's different when you're hearing a person that is living, that is telling you that my house actually disappeared under the water, and this is how I started this. That changes things for you. Like, you know, I've been advocating, I've been talking about climate change for a long time, but I've also been very fortunate not to really feel all of its impact. So having people right in front of me telling me that they've lost their family member, they've lost things in their life, things have changed so much, makes it so much real, and it also then empowered me to continue on in this. So I think for me, the climate justice, the Youth Climate Summit was so important because of that. I don't know if you want to say something about, we can talk about threat committee later.
Yeah, no, but the Climate Summit, again, that was our first event. Like, the Youth Climate Summit was our first event on our second trip to New York, and it was an exceptional event. It was run so well, considering it was the first time being run. And as Valerie said, you got first-hand stories. You had, this was going beyond resolutions. This was going beyond negotiations. These were real-life accounts of people who were radically affected by the impact of climate change. And it really put a lot of things into perspective for us, because, again, echoing what Valerie said, I wouldn't have much first-hand experience as towards the really devastating impacts that climate change can have. But then when you talk to people about how rising sea levels can destroy homes and can destroy communities and villages, or how desertification can ruin crop yield, and once you get that first-hand story, it really does shine a light on the importance of it. Obviously, going into the role, we knew quite a lot, and Valerie knew an exceptional amount about environmentalism and climate action. But once you get those stories, it really does kind of resonate with you a lot harder. But yeah, we might move on to the next slide and actually go through some of the key overview points. Yeah, so obviously, as Valerie said, the Youth Assembly and Climate was our first event, but then we went into High Level Week. High Level Week is, for one, it's like a week-long All Ireland for the United Nations. It was fantastic, hands down one of the best weeks I have ever had in my life. It was a crazy experience. We were running around the place in a very controlled fashion, but we were really we were on so many events and going to so many meetings. We got to meet with some world leaders, and everybody was there, and there was a buzz about the place. There was a great energy and excitement about the place, because this was the hub for 1 week where all the world leaders and everybody who wanted to help change the world was in the one vicinity, or was in the same vicinity. So you can see there, we got to meet with the likes of Minister Bruton, we got to meet with Helen McEntee, and we also got to work on the Quan Gesh. Now, for those who aren't aware, the Quan Gesh is a global youth agreement headed by Ireland, which works to get increased youth participation, increased youth voice in the climate change movement. Valerie, you're far more competent at explaining the Quan Gesh than I ever was or will be, so I might get you to kind of double down on that one.
Yeah, that's no problem. And like, especially like the High Level Week, like Jack said, I don't think anything that we can say can prepare you for the High Level Week. I don't think anybody is ever prepared for a High Level Week. That is what I've realized from talking to people. It is the most exciting, and it's just so much is happening at the same time. It's almost like the place where you're like, okay, this is where things are decided from the world, and it's just like it's so much is happening at the same time, so much buzz out there, but also so many opportunity to actually meet people and actually get some work done. I know that in our highlights, we're not really talking about also what's happening behind the scene. So in top of all the event that is happening, you bumped into Minister, but you also bumped into representative from other countries. This is the beauty of the UN. You meet you meet a representative from Sweden, you introduce yourself as the UN Youth Delegate, and you tell them what you think, especially if you know exactly what they do and which committee they're more inclined to work. You give your opinion and you make sure that that's also reflected, and you get your Swedish UN Youth Delegate to back you up on it later on the back. So much is happening at the same time. It's really crazy. Yes, Kwangesh was like my little baby. I remember taking the subway of New York with the big poster of Kwangesh, trying to get it to the, trying to get it out to the global strike, the global climate strike. Crazy idea. I do not advise anybody to do it, but it was also amazing because a lot of people then ask questions. So, like Jack said, Kwangesh is actually like translated, it means solemn promise. It's between it's Irish and Marshall Islands, and the Marshall Islands coming together. So it's two languages brought together, which gave us the beautiful language. But at the same time, so even here in Ireland, for us to be aware that we like Ireland did not just come up with it, also signed it in order to make sure that young people are really included in all decision makings on climate change. It's really to increase that participation of the youth's voice on how do we deal with the climate crisis out there. So at close to the end of the high level week, we had world leaders and the UN Youth Delegates all together under a family photos, which is another thing that is really loved at these events, together signing Kwangesh, promising, basically like the words, a solemn promise, promising that they will do their best to include the voices of young people. And it is also up to us now that we know that he exists to make sure to hold them accountable and being like, well, you signed there, you wanted us to be there. It's a way in. So the way I saw it and the way I talked about it mainly in the building, around the building, is it's an open door for young people to approach, to work with their government to make sure that their voices is heard. So there's always the right and responsibility in all of this that we have to take. So you have the right to speak, but you have the responsibility to make sure that you're actually taking the platform. So it's not enough to just say that I want to participate, but it's also like, when you participate, how do you do it? I think that's also very important for us to always remember that in all that we do, that there's the right and the responsibility that has to work together as such. Yeah. What is the next event? Yeah, this was a little, this was, so apart from events actually happening at the UN, you also get to organize, you can also organize events. So we decided to organize a side event with Bulgaria because during our Berlin trip, we figured out that they were also, in their mandate, they also wanted to talk a lot about decent work. So we decided to come together and organize a side event where we actually unpacked decent work. So we worked with, do you want to say more about this actually?
Yes, for sure. It's, decent work is more up my street. So we were fortunate enough to work within the Irish mission, the permanent mission there in their office on decent work with meaning, as Valerie said. So what we examined was, we worked with the Bulgarian youth delegates to really examine what is decent work, what is meaningful work, how do we reduce, or how do we increase pay parity across countries, across gender, across a variety of issues. And we were fortunate enough to get representatives from the ILO, the International Labour Organization, to give presentation, to also work with the participants. There a lot of youth delegates fortunately showed up. As Valerie said, the family kind of sticks together. So at all the side events, we were all kind of jump around to each other's events, just to keep in touch and to really engage properly with the format of the discussion. And we worked with the Irish mission, as mentioned, and I have to say, to be fair, we got really good support from the mission throughout our time over in New York. They answered questions very nicely, which may have been a bit simple, and they could have had a lot on their plates, but it really did take time to work with us. And that's one thing I have to say, throughout the whole year, we have had fantastic support mechanism throughout. So brownie points for Aoife and gang. But Yeah, so that was the decent work with meaning side event. But moving on then to the bottom two photos was our third committee speech, which Aoife alluded to earlier on in the conversation. So the third committee speech, when I was presented, when I was told that I was getting the chance to speak on behalf of Ireland at third committee, I was really excited. But when I was sitting on that chair, I was so nervous. I have a fair, like, as people who've worked with me know, it's kind of hard to shut me up at the best of times. So I'm always fairly happy to be talking. But when I was on that seat, it was a lot of nerves and a lot of pressure, because you're representing your country, you're representing young people across Ireland at the United Nations on the grand stage, and to speak about serious issues. We were speaking about, Valerie focused on climate action and eco-anxiety, and I focused on mental health with young people. As anybody in this call is well aware, those two are perhaps two of the most prevalent issues that young people in Ireland have at the minute. So having that responsibility and trying to deliver it as best we can it was scary at the start, but once you start speaking about it, it just, your passion shines through. A lot of youth delegates were fortunate enough to represent their country at the third committee, and it was really nice to kind of have that support mechanism. It's, I don't know if you can see in the photographs there, but at the background you have the Slovenian youth delegate taking photographs. And it was really good to have that support as well for speaking on the third committee speech. So yeah, Valerie, have you any points on the third committee?
Like, it's impossible not to say anything about third committee, because like Jack, in the beginning, I was like, yeah, of course, I've done many speeches out there. I'm totally fine. Third committee is coming along. I'm going to represent the voices of young people of Ireland. However, yes, it was nerve-wracking. There's a system where every day you come into the room and you actually see where you're at, where you're at in terms of like when you're coming next to speak. And I don't think that really helps in terms of anxiety, because you're almost constantly checking either online or on the board that is there. It's, you're like, okay, so I'm 34, and it goes really fast, that by the time they come to you, they tap you and be like, you're next, you're almost like a little moment of freezing. And I know this was like probably the 3 longest minutes of my life, and nobody else cared about it, probably except me. But yeah, it was great. One thing I can say about third committee that I've learned is there's a difference when you're writing a speech for an event, and then writing a speech that you're speaking to the world. Because in that room, you have to remember that there's different countries, different ways of life, different way perspective. Even the words that you choose can be interpreted differently. So I remember rewriting my speech about 5 to 7 times, making sure that what I'm saying, that my message is clear enough that everyone understands it the way I want it to be understood, because there's nothing worse than people not understanding what you want to say or misunderstanding it. And I think that's part of diplomacy as well, and that's part of the hard part about these institutions that we sometimes forget, that we are bringing people with different works of life all together, coming, seeing things differently. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong, but how do we make sure that when we're speaking, we're still speaking the same language? So yeah, it was a very it was an experience I will always remember, and it has taught me so much about how important language is, to make sure that you're very clear to transmit not just what it's in your head, but you're thinking about the audience, you're thinking about the people that is going to receive it. There's no point of making fluffy things where it could be misunderstood, because then you're bringing yourself 3 steps back. You want the person that is sitting right beside you being like, I hear you, I can relate. You want, like, I don't know, the Democratic Republic of Congo being like, I hear you and I can relate, as much as possible. You're never going to satisfy everyone, but you can try your best to make sure that that's an important message out there. So that's one thing I've learned from third committee as such, and delivering that speech for Ireland. It's hard work, so well done to all the diplomats out there to do that all the time.
Yeah, that's for sure. You really do start to understand the importance of language and the words you use and the tone you use. You really have to self-examine how you present yourself and how you present your words, more importantly, because as Valerie said, this is the world stage. This is working with countries from every walk of life across every corner of the globe. So it's crucial that not one wrong word could be bad, but you certainly have to be very careful in what you say and how you approach things to understand other people's perspectives. Like lots of different cultures are coming together, and everybody is there for the common good. Everybody is there to represent their country at the UN in order to create a better world. As cliche as it sounds, that's what everybody's prerogative and passion is when they are at the United Nations. So it was a really good and informative session to actually understand the importance of words and language in that regard. But yeah.
Actually, during third committee as well, apart from the speech, you actually have, this year we were fortunate enough to actually witness and participate in the youth resolution that happens every 2 years for third committee. So that again is another experience on its own, to actually sit in and be able to participate in an actual UN resolution was an experience of its own, listening to people debating on different issues, and even seeing how the issues are affected. Again, perspective and a different perspective is a key here. And I think that's why in diplomacy, you can't go in saying that you know it all, because your reality is probably not someone else's reality. You always have to ask yourself, instead of trying to judge a person and be like, oh, they're backwards in their thinking, or I cannot believe that I still have to repeat this again and again. I thought we've established that human rights is a thing and stuff. It doesn't help anyone actually to do that. But actually taking a step back and trying to understand, but why is it? What is their history? What has happened in their life, in the history of their country, on how their community work? What is it that is actually driving them not to respond to this and that? And that's actually how a resolution works. So it was very tough. I'm not gonna lie to you. It was very tough sitting in that room. People usually, when they talk about negotiation, they usually talk about poker face. I definitely think I don't have one. I realized it very quickly when other UN Youth Delegate would text me and be like, your face is dropping, Val. And I'm like, okay, we gotta smile on this. So definitely you will hear things that might annoy you, that might really get your blood going and be like, but why? But then I've also learned so much about how important it is to take into consideration how other people are seeing things. If we want to evolve, if we want to move forward, like how do you disagree better? That's usually the word I use. How do you disagree better? So the youth resolution negotiation really taught me that. So if you're going in there, always think it's not about you. It's not a personal attack. Try to really take that step back. Make the effort to take a step back and actually trying to want to understand where the other is coming, even if you don't agree with them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Okay, will we move on to the next slide? Okay. Yeah, so life after General Assembly. Once we came back after that 3-week stint, I think we have both kind of exhausted our energy as much as or beyond our possibilities. So we took a short break and then we returned again back into the action. We were very fortunate to have the opportunity to host the president of the UN General Assembly. When he came to Ireland. It was a fantastic opportunity to really engage with young people in that regard. And we, as the slide says, we co-moderated a panel discussion with the president of the GA. And as well as that, we had lots of young people in the venue as well. And it was surprisingly an informal chat. It was a really good conversation, working about the actual technicalities of getting young people to participate properly and to really get their voice heard more effectively. He was a very, very soft-spoken man and really just broke it down in a very manageable way for everybody in the room. And it was a very informal chat. And yeah, I was pleasantly surprised at how beneficial it was. I think everybody who was in the room gained a vast experience, no matter how experienced they were in youth participation and youth advocacy. And just really getting his perspective on things and having an open conversation, open dialogue where you could agree or disagree and really engage with a good conversation, have good questions and answers. It wasn't a very stiff and formal event that can happen. Sometimes it was a very informal one. And I got a lot out of it. I had great fun there.
Yeah,
it was
definitely.
very, yeah, it's we had a couple of different civil society organizations. Which ones did we have, Valerie?
I think we had Girl Guides. We had the presentation of like the Friday for Future. Yeah. We had lots of young people from different groups in Ireland. I think for me, this day, like yourself, it was great, really good. But what I liked especially about it is, in terms of youth participation, it was nice to kind of switch the role a little. Instead of bringing young people to the institution, actually bringing the institution to young people. In a way, it was almost like we brought the UN General Assembly to the young people in Ireland, in their country, in their space, to actually talk directly to someone that will bring it to the institution. So yeah, that was a good day.
Okay, we'll touch on to the next slide.
Yeah, and then we also hosted the National Youth Council Youth Climate Summit, which was a brilliant day. Again, we had like young people coming from all over Ireland, from the age of 8, I think, like the youngest participant was like from 8 until like 25 more. So it was also great just bringing young people and actually talking about climate revolution and seeing how do we make sure that our voices is heard, and how do we create some sort of manifesto about what young people in Ireland want about climate change. So yeah, another brilliant day out there speaking to young people. And yeah, it's actually one part, apart from being in negotiation rooms and meeting world leaders, meeting ministers and all of this, one of the things is like, that I really liked from the program is having that direct contact with young people in Ireland, because actually what we do throughout the year, I had to constantly remind myself of what would a young person in Ireland want about this, what would a young person in Ireland would think about this subject. So whenever we had the opportunity one-on-one to meet young people, it was always great to hear. And sometimes I know some of you probably didn't realize that. You're probably like, oh, they're not listening because it's not written, but we were listening, and we took that with us. And so whatever room we were in, we kind of remembered, that person told me this was important, so I need to say this as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's we might touch on to the next slide, because I am conscious of time.
Yes.
So yeah, our last foreign trip as youth delegates, we had a couple of more lined up, but I think we all know the reason why those got cancelled, so we won't
talk about it.
But yeah, so as Aoife mentioned earlier on in the presentation, we got to travel to Brussels with a number of other European Union youth delegates, and to sit in discussions with the Working Party, or the European Union Working Party for the United Nations. And that was fantastic. It was a really nice way to kind of kick off 2020 again. So we got to engage in the discussion of CONUN, the UN Working Party. And as you can see there were 3 key issues. We had multilateralism, we had YPS, and we had climate action. We all spoke on varying points, but it was the first time where youth delegates had been actively involved in CONUN discussions, which was mentioned throughout the discussion. And the woman who was chairing the conversation even mentioned at the end of it how good, and I suppose how refreshing it was to have a youth perspective firsthand, delivering statements on behalf of their countries within the CONUN negotiations or the CONUN discussions. As well as that, we worked with the European Union and got to go around to the buildings, and we got to engage in a couple of more discussions. I know we were kind of whisked away to catch a flight that evening, so we didn't get to stay for all of the events. But again, it was really good to understand how the European Union works with the United Nations. It's something that we didn't have a whole pile of exposure to beyond 1 or 2 meetings within the General Assembly and the advocacy training weekend in Berlin. So it was nice to actually go to the HQ of the European Union or the Council of the EU, and to work with them to understand how they do it when they're working within their offices.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we can say about the EU, the CONUN meeting, is this is a good example of what we mean when we say that, again, the program or the platform is there, and what you do with it is really the opportunity that is given. What you do with it can actually lead to something new and something progressive. So as the EU Youth Delegates in New York during high-level meeting, we formally asked, we were invited to the EU mission one of the evening just to have a conversation, and we had sort of talked to each other and were already wondering why wasn't it a proper coordination? Why weren't we invited to the proper coordinations of the EU? We want to be, since we are here as representative of young people from our country, we should also be invited to those talks. So we openly just like had a go at the people at the EU mission. And we explained the reason why. So we didn't just ask and left. We explained why we should be invited, what were the benefits, and that we're already here, and why should we not use this platform. So under that effect, I don't really know actually when we left whether we were expecting this to happen. No, we had said our piece and we hoped that they had learned, and probably we thought next year's UN Youth Delegate will be the one to benefit. But it was very surprising that they did actually hear us. They went ahead and organized this, and like Aoife said, it was the very, very first time that UN Youth Delegates were invited to the Council of Europe, the Common Party meeting. And I'm sure it's not the last, as the chairwoman had said that day, it's the first of many. So this is it. This is one of those concrete things that you can be like, as a UN Youth Delegate, this is it. This didn't exist before, and now it does exist. So just if you were having doubt about what is it that we do and does it actually change things, does it actually do, this is one really good, simple example to show that what you do does reflect and does open other doors for other young people to take on them.
Yeah, so I suppose just kind of sum up the year in review. We'll be moving on to the next part after this, but there's just a couple of more things that we feel may be important just kind of sconce through. These were the main highlights. These were the big highlights that we had throughout the year. But throughout the year, we're going to lots of events and lots of negotiations, which may be of a slightly smaller scale, but still extremely significant. And we'll just touch on them briefly. I think the biggest one to chat about maybe your trip over to COP. Valerie, if you want to give a quick rundown on that.
Yes, so definitely the year in review, there were so many different events that was happening. Also, we've been speakers at different panels, and it was very hard to put everything on a review on the slideshow. But yes, so as a UN Youth Delegate, you do also get invited to panel discussion. But COP was definitely another major point, or in another major area to go to, especially for someone like me who is really climate change and climate action is really at the core of what I see as the opening to that change of systematic change. So it was very good to participate. I noticed a couple of people in the COP like that were with me in COP. Other young people from Ireland were there as well present. So again, another experience. Probably not exactly what you want or expect, but that's also part of the journey, seeing where we are at in terms of international negotiation. So it's never going to be perfect, but then that for me, COP for me was that learning in terms of like recognizing where we're actually at in terms of climate action on the international level, understanding what are those points that is stopping us from progressing, what are the biggest debates that is out there. So yeah, it was another great experience as such. But also the gender, so I also attended the panel discussion on the gender equality. So here in Ireland, which was super amazing, especially being surrounded by amazing women in Irish history, actually, that participated in this big change that we call the Beijing Declaration. It was just fantastic. I would always remember the breakfast morning with the ambassador of Ireland back in 1995 in China, and having the conversation and just being blown, like from my mind just being blown and being like, oh my God, I am just right here with this woman that has done so much back in time where it was even harder, even harder as a woman to speak or to take those positions. It was really empowering, and also laughing about the certain stuff that I found in a negotiation room and actually that they're talking about, and I'm like, it still happens. And so having that comments moment, it was I can actually now say I had common experience with great women of history in Ireland. So yeah, again, these things, this is why, like, when somebody asked me what was the UN Youth Delegate program, I always say it was a life experience as such, because it has taught me so much more than I expected when I came in. Really.
Yeah, no, that's for certain. It's I think that's an experience that's gained by every youth delegate across the world and across the generations that have been here. I suppose just two quick highlights from my own point of view. As Valerie said, there was a lot of separate panel discussions. The most recent one would have been the Future Generations event during Wales Week. So Wales organise a week-long celebration across the world for themselves, and we got to work in collaboration with the likes of the British Embassy, with the likes of Foreign Affairs, and discuss about the role of future generations. Wales are one of, I suppose, the more pioneering areas insofar as they have a Future Generations Act and a Future Generations Commissioner. And that focuses solely on young people and the future of work, the future of happiness, what the world will look like in future, and how do we best prepare for that? How do we best prepare the next generation for that? And how do we best prepare to accommodate that and make it as good as it can be? So it was a great panel discussion between Irish representatives and Welsh representatives. I know the other Irish representatives here on the call at the minute, and it was really good to actually engage with another region, more young people from another region, especially so close to ourselves, and to really work on common issues, but also to understand the differences that the cultures may have in terms of Ireland and Wales. It's obviously sports is a big difference in terms of capability in rugby, but we won't go into that. And but it was really good to actually get that level of engagement with young people and with the government as well. It's always fantastic to get good government engagement on these issues, especially ones pertaining so much to young people on a more global level than what we may be used to here in Ireland. And then beyond that, I suppose the other primary event was fortunate enough to speak on behalf of young people at the Education for Sustainable Development Forum in Dublin Castle towards the end of 2019. So what that focused on was a review of education for sustainable development, target 4.7 for all you SDG nerds out there. And we got to understand where we are currently, but more importantly, the big changes that have to be made, such as greater inclusion of marginalized youth, which is what I kind of focused on with my talk. Getting young people from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds, or backgrounds who may not have the same level of inclusion that may be taken for granted in other areas of Ireland, and how can we effectively get more young people and create those systems and a safe space for young people to engage with sustainable development properly. But yeah, no, I think we might actually go on to the next point now, just again in the interest of time. So yeah, I think it's kind of one of our biggest, it's a rite of passage. I don't know if we're too happy to be handing over the reins, but we knew when we signed up that we'd have to give it over eventually, and that's what this part of the conversation is about. As you may have seen across social media, we've now opened applications for the next batch of UN Youth Delegates to Ireland. If you haven't already gathered by now, and I know Valerie will be able to echo me on this and provide more context to it, it is such an amazing year. It's challenging. There are lots of challenges. There certainly are. It's not necessarily an easy year. But the work you get to do and the opportunities that you've seen here, I mean, I couldn't have dreamt of them in my wildest dreams. To have those opportunities to speak on behalf of young people, and especially on behalf of Ireland, at like such large scale events and such important meetings and negotiations. So yeah, we are looking for the next youth delegates. It's up on the youth.ie website, on the NYCI website, but we might touch on to the next point, onto the next slide there. Yeah, so yeah, Valerie, if you want to take over this part.
Yeah, so like Jack said, I guess we can't hold on to it any longer, and we probably also don't want to, because we think it's actually really good that Ireland has such a system of that pivoted and changing UN Youth Delegate, because what it allows for more voices of young people coming in with different experiences, actually tackling this. So definitely it is a life-changing. It will it's like a school. It's a teaching moment for you if you allow it to become a teaching moment. Like, we have to be clear, like, this experience, you get to shape it the way you want. So it really depends on like the mindset that you come in when you want to do this. Like Jack said, it is not easy. You're going to have ups and downs. You're going to have moments where you're going to question, what the hell am I even doing? You're gonna have great moments where you're like, this is why this is the reason why I do this. And you're gonna have moments where your body's just gonna refuse to act because we're people. We have blood, and as much as we want to do so much more that we can't do, there is so much more that we wanted to do, but actually accepting our limitation as well as human being is part of it, and stuff. So ups and downs, but it is the greatest experience if you want it to be. So I really encourage everyone to put your application out there. Sorry, Val, you might receive so many. Good work for you guys. But I really encourage everyone to try, and yeah, even if this time is not yours, keep on trying and stuff out there, because it's an amazing experience. Yeah,
it really is. And I think that kind of brings us towards the end of the presentation. Would you mind just flicking onto the next slide there?
Yeah, we're receiving questions as well already, so we might have to we might go on to answering some of them.
Yeah, it's
we might not have time to answer everything, but yeah, Leo?
We'll make a fair stab at it. So we might jump onto the first question here from Keith. How time consuming is the position, and are there periods where you are busier than usual? Short answer, yes. It is, and again, I think a lot of it it is a time consuming role, but it's entirely up to us how much time we put into it. I think that if you're applying for this, first and foremost, you are pretty passionate about UN work, about making the world a better place. So for me, kind of, especially at the start, I was just trying to figure out the important UN parts while kind of focusing on my passions. So sustainable development is, I don't know why, but I'm absolutely driven by it. And it was really good to get that sort of explicit knowledge in terms of how the UN works and the policy making. But in terms of time periods being busier than usual, the General Assembly, hands down, that high level week is absolutely crazy. Everything else seems like a doddle in comparison. But there are, again, like, I mean, our trips, like foreign trips, are a lot more intensive than perhaps our time here in Ireland, because we are landing, we're getting out of the airport, going to events and working non-stop until we hop on a plane and come back to Ireland. So yeah, I think the periods abroad are certainly busier than usual, but hands down, the General Assembly is like nothing else.
Yeah, like, I mean, and don't forget that you're not doing this alone. You have an amazing team behind you. Like when we're talking Valerie, Aoife, like the mission in Geneva, the mission in New York, you're never really alone, and people are quite accommodating, and you can work it around your schedule to the best possible. But there is definitely those big commitments like the General Assembly that is important for you to attend, and things like that. And yes, General Assembly, definitely a crazy moment. Get yourself a lot of sleep before it because you're going to need it. Yeah.
Now, the next question is coming from Anna. How do you think the work practices of the UN Youth Delegates will change in response to the current pandemic? Is the shift to remote work an opportunity to achieve greater inclusion of marginalised youth within Ireland?
That's a good question. I guess, well, how is COVID-19 going to change the practice as such? I mean, the good example that I can say is like other countries have already selected their new UN Youth Delegates, and they've already started the mandate within COVID. So again, you have that family to use as an example of how are they working. A lot of the work is is online, and that could be a good thing in terms of including more young people that probably perhaps couldn't travel far and all of this stuff. But definitely, I know COVID is going to have some sort of effect on the program, but within itself, it's definitely still possible. Like our contribution to the Youth, Peace and Security for the Security Council debate on the topic all happened online. We weren't able to be in New York, but yet again, it was it still felt, we still had more meetings, we still were able to contribute to the statement, it was still broadcasted and still on the web page of the United Nations. So in terms of the impact, I think the impact can still be achieved at the same level as if you were physically there.
Yeah, definitely. Just completely resonate with what you were saying, Valerie. It's it will most likely be different for a while until the pandemic is at a lesser or severity than what it is. But it's a fantastic opportunity, as the question mentioned, to engage with young people across Ireland. It's I think by having a greater focus on the online element of being a youth delegate and of advocacy work, you can really get a better reach and get a better network. And again, it's down to creativity of youth delegates. It's I mean, there were times in General Assembly where we kind of had to come together quickly and come up with quick game plans about things. So it's at the drop of a hat, things can change at the best of times. But during the pandemic, I really feel the support network. We're fortunate as Irish delegates, and I don't know the other delegate programs as well as I know the Irish one, but I know the support network there is really good, and everybody's working together. So everybody's in the same position, as Valerie was saying. The new youth delegate batch is in this position as well with COVID-19. So although we can't give an explicit answer because we don't fully know how different or for how long it's going to be, we know it's a fantastic opportunity to really think outside the box and to engage with people in brand new ways, perhaps even more relatable ways than what we were doing ourselves this year, by going far greater detail on the online side of things.
Jack, do you mind if I just say a word there?
Yeah, for sure.
So just speaking of, we're all in the same boat. I mean, the same questions really apply also to functioning diplomats who aren't youth delegates. We don't really know how this year is going to look. We don't know, for instance, if the General Assembly will take place in the same way. It could be a great equalizer, that everybody is online, including youth delegates. So it's a bit of a mystery to all of us, but as Valerie and Jack have said, the programme still has huge value and could reach out in ways that it hasn't so far because of the pandemic, which is a really interesting thought. Go ahead there.
Oh no, it's a great point. It's everybody's in the same position at the minute, so we're all trying to work together in order to get the best results that we can on a day-to-day basis sometimes, but hopefully with a bit more cohesion as the time goes on. So we'll move on to the next question here from Ross. What part of the program was the steepest learning curve for you to overcome? And would you say that if you were in college now, was taking a gap year ideal to commit fully? I might jump on this part first because I feel like this was half made for me. So I'm halfway through my undergraduate, 2 years down of a 4-year degree. And I decided to take a gap year in order to work the youth delegate program. It is a volunteer role and it's very flexible as to how you manage your time. But I knew myself going into this year that I really wanted to give it a lot more commitment than what I'd be able to give if I were studying full-time in college. Anybody who's currently in college or anyone who's gone through the process knows how taxing it can be, especially around peak times with exams and things. So I felt personally that taking the gap year was the best decision. And looking back, I'm very glad that I did. But that being said, it's very subjective as to how you manage your time, how well you manage your time. Obviously, trips are a big question as to how much time you can miss from college, whether there's attendance levels that you have to meet. But again, given the pandemic, it's a more ever-changing environment now than it has been before. So without giving too vague of an answer, it is very much up to an applicant or a potential youth delegate themselves to make that decision. But just from my experience, taking the gap year was a really good idea. Actually, sorry, there was a first part of this question, Valerie. What part of the program was the steepest learning curve for you to overcome?
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that question is steep as well. I can't think off the top of my off the top of my head in terms of like the steepest curve.
I know for myself, the biggest thing for me was the different cultures. That was such a massive thing. It's I suppose when you're working just in the Irish space and like, perhaps a bit more, a bit of a wider lens if you're fortunate enough to do so. But I know myself, I had a bit more of a sheltered outlook on a lot of things. And again, you really don't understand people's perspectives until you're having a conversation with them. Again, like, I was somewhat surprised at how simple all the conversations were. They were very like I wasn't a part of any heated arguments, at least none that I was aware of that were heated. And it was really good to actually get just different perspectives. But it really puts into focus how you view things and what your assumptions are and what your prejudices are. Nobody should ever assume that they're fully right all of the time. And I think working in the UN, where there are so many different cultures and so many ways of life, and so many preconditions that people are working in, regardless, like. Every country is different, every UN state is different. So trying to understand the context in which they work in was probably a big, and it still is a very continuous but a very steep learning curve. It wasn't just, it didn't happen one day. There wasn't a sudden light bulb realization. It's been going on ever since, and even to this day, working on YPS and working on the Irish statement there and reading other statements, you really start to understand the complexity of diplomacy and international relations. So it's something that I haven't by any stretch of the imagination mastered yet, but I think I'm a lot more informed now than I was at the start of the year.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's it. I don't want to say that it was the steepest curve is the diplomacy or how to become more diplomatic, but it's more about that, and I don't know if you've picked it up throughout the call, it's that active, conscious stepping back and making sure that you're really, you're going into the space trying to recognize that you don't know it all, you're not the beginning and end of knowledge, that other experience is very important and other people's reality are very real, and that is what impacts. Like, everyone is coming with a story, and it is important to acknowledge that story because that's what makes you understand where they're coming from. And even if you want to move forward in terms of coming to some sort of conclusion, also moving forward in terms of progress, we're going to have to need that. And sometimes it's going to require you to acknowledge, even when you don't completely agree, which is fine. No one is telling you that you have to agree at all time, but accepting or making sure that you acknowledge other people's reality is very, very important. And I think, yes, and that's something that I haven't nailed yet, but we're still working on it, but it was very good. It was a big school to teach you that it's almost like activism versus advocates as such. So what's that difference? You know, how much can I push and how much do I need to release to allow it to work so we can actually move forward together? Because otherwise I'm going to keep on pushing and everybody's behind, no progress is happening, you know? So what do you accept to take now and then wait for later? I think, yeah, that's my steepest cut.
It's now we'll touch on one or two more questions, and I'm not fully sure if we'll get to all of them, but we'll certainly get answers out over coming days if we don't get time to today. So the next question is from Eva. Did you have much experience of public speaking and policy making before becoming a delegate? And did you have a lot of relevant experience prior to occupying this position? I think we came into this program from two very different angles. We both had a lot of experience in our own regard. But I really think, to be fair, I think NYCI and the selection committee got the match right because we really understood a wide range of or a wide spectrum of perspectives. So just quickly on my own point of view, like, I'm coming in from a more business perspective. I'm coming in on business implementation of the SDGs, how to kind of make businesses a bit more, how to make the bad businesses a bit more good, which is, geez, I'll take diplomacy and international relations any day over that task. But just really to get active engagement and innovation, because the SDGs won't be accomplished without engagement from absolutely everybody. It's going to take every person, every organization in order to achieve these wide goals. So that's kind of the experience I'd have, and as well as that, a couple of student projects which are still ongoing from my own behalf, just trying to work with varying groups and varying regions to create sustainable development. And Valerie, your honors list just goes on and on, so maybe give a quick overview.
No, yeah, so I was fortunate enough to also to have done a lot of public speaking, because I used to be a debater in both secondary school and in college. But trust me, that's not the end of it. That's not the end of it. Even being a debater and coming up with and being able to take an argument apart is not all you need to do this work well. I think the passion and the real will that you want change, understanding the circumstances of the global society is more important. So if you have that eye towards, I want change, and I know that change is not going to happen in the world if we all don't participate in it, I think that's more of the experience that is more relevant from this space. It always helped. Yes, I'm not going to lie, it did help that I had a background in international relations, that I had worked around in youth participation for quite a long time, and that I have been a youth activist for as long as I can remember. My mother will tell you, since probably I can speak. that all helped, but I don't think it's the only thing. I think it's more, if you have the passion and you know that you yourself, your view and your voice is really important to making sure that you bring progress, you will convince other people that their voice is also important, and that's actually what brings change, and that's actually what makes the big difference as such.
Definitely. It's okay, we'll move on to the next question quickly. Okay, from Tig, when did you learn that you had an interest in youth affairs and international diplomacy? So since you could speak, that's when you started your interest.
Yeah, I guess since I was like, the world is an unfair place. And I was like, no, things can't be like this. There must be a different reality out there. Since I think I've always been interested, not just in politics as such. And I think this has something to do with my view of the world. I see myself as a real participant in this world. Like this whole idea, what a citizen mean? A citizen is not just someone that is in the country. A citizen is someone that actually participates in the conversation, in the build-up of their nation, of the global community. This is my definition of what it means. So I've always been interested in diplomacy or international relations because of that, because I felt like I am a member of that whole broader spectrum. So it's not, the participation is not just when I'm a UN Youth Delegate and I'm in that building, but even when I'm in my house, how I vote, what I do, how I talk to people in my community, I am participating in the global community and the global discussion. So don't wait until you become a UN Youth Delegate or a diplomat to make a change. The change will start in your community, in your house, because I always say this, the politicians out there are our mothers or brothers or sisters, our pharmacists, or like, you know, they're all of those people. They're literally just people like us. So there's not that change, and I think that's something that needs to click in terms of how we actually act and what we consider being a member and participating in international discussion.
Yeah, definitely. It's okay. We'll take one more question. I think we'll have to wrap up then. So from Lorna, what was the most significant impact that you've made or encouraged as a UN Youth Delegate? I'll quickly touch on it. I suppose from a personal point of view, mental health is a very personal issue for me, and it's something I really try and champion throughout the year. And again, that's like from a very personal perspective of what I've been doing as a youth delegate, but just really trying to destigmatize and normalize the conversation around mental health, particularly in young people. Look, everybody, we won't dig into the details. Everybody's aware of the mental health problems that we have here, especially in Ireland, and the important work in so far as the likes of Pieta House or Jigsaw works in terms of mental health, the promotion of positive mental health and suicide prevention. So that would be a big thing for me, giving 2 speeches, one in a youth delegate capacity and another as in my own personal capacity at the United Nations, at the General Assembly, was a big thing for me. But that's not to undermine everything else that's been done. It's just that's something that's really personal for me. Every event I think we kind of gave it socks towards every event that we kind of worked towards, and we really wanted to make sure that we made most of every opportunity. And whether we were experts in the field or not, like the fact that we were in the door, the fact that we had the opportunity to have that negotiation, to actually have an adequate voice and to have a fair hearing across whatever topic it was that we were representing. I think between the pair of us, we really did give it 110%, because as the year went on, we realized how important each and every one of these events, no matter how large scale or small scale was, like how significant each event was, and how we could, by speaking or by negotiating or by talking about whatever issue it was, we had an opportunity to actually shape whether it was Irish policy or Irish perspective, or even up as far as the European and global perspective. So those were big things for me.
Yeah, and I think it would be quite similar for me as well. Is it was significant that the perspective was brought into the room. We've been fortunate to see how a point that we bring up, or another UN Youth Delegate will bring up, can actually shift the conversation, can shift where we're actually talking about, because it's just a different perspective that was never in the room that is there. And I think in terms of another impact for me would be just young people being able to relate, you know, because we're talking about this subject, and making, and they also feel like, okay, this is not just for the big people, it's for me too, to talk about. I would always take with me, every time I've met young people, whether they were very young at 8 or whether they were a lot older, just having that conversation with them, and them having that click moment of being like, I see you, and I hear my voice, and or I feel like someone is talking about something that I would talk about, or someone is talking about the big topic in such a language that is accessible to me. That's an impact as well. Because like we said in the beginning, for me, this whole journey was not just about bringing the voices of young people in the institution, but also to bring the institution to young people. So even the increased interaction of young people wanting to know, so what is that institution actually? What is that agency of the UN? What do they do? Having those questions, for me, that's also an impact. And we know, and we've seen it happen, that it has opened many doors. Being invited to a place where you spoke, and then it was recognized that actually we don't do this often, but perhaps we should include young people at all of the discussion. Perhaps we should ask the opinion of young people about this topic, because sometimes it just happens that people don't think about it until it happens. It's almost like something's become real because it's right in front of you. So just for us being there became a reality for a lot of people, and that's an impact. So the next young person that will come knocking at the door will obviously have a better chance, because they've heard the young people speak before, and they have more confidence that they do actually bring something important into policy. Like Aoife said earlier on, it's not just about representation, but it's actually an enriching of policies that you guys bring. And it is true. And that's what the impact is, really.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I think we may draw the line here. We're conscious that there are still a lot of unanswered questions. So we'll get answers out to you. We'll try and figure out after this call.
Yeah, if you can send it to us by email, and if you have any other question, if you're thinking about your application, but you have, please do ask us questions. We're here to try to respond to as many people as possible. And
yeah, no, that's exactly it. Any questions or queries you may have, and no matter how important or unimportant you may feel that they were questions that we've either asked ourselves before, during, or after this role. So seriously, there are no questions that we won't be able to give some form of answer, or at least our own perspective on. So be sure to reach out, whether it's through email or through social media. And for anybody who's applying, the very best of luck. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, we do apologize we didn't get to answer every question, but just in the interest of time for everybody, we'll get answers out across some format over the coming while. And stay safe and enjoy the sunny day that we find ourselves in.
Indoors.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, guys.